Hi, everybody. I'm here with Patrick McFadden, the VP of Developer Relations for DataStax. We're here to talk about his open source journey, some of the stuff he's working on, and some of the fun things happening at DataStax and in the Cassandra community. Hey, Patrick, how are you today?
What's up, Matt? How are you doing?
I'm great. It's a little warm here. It's actually like 75, and it's supposed to be cold, and it's actually kind of hot.
Yeah, it's not typical. We shouldn't have this. I mean, I live in California. We just haven't had bad weather at all this year. So we need it. We could use it. But what are you going to do, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you guys need the rain sometimes, and sometimes you get too much rain, and it's hit or miss in California. But everybody likes the weather because it's generally fairly mild, right? So
yes, it's a nice place to live. But you know what I miss is leaving it.
Well, yeah, we're all stuck, right?
Yeah, I should be on a plane right now, but no, it's not happening.
When was the last in-person conference you attended?
The last in-person conference was at the end of January. It was Day Texas in Austin. And little did I know that was going to be the one and only conference I went to that year.
So that was a year ago January, not this January, just to clarify. Yeah.
2020. I think the next big one I was booked to go to was KubeCon in Amsterdam. And, we were all excited, getting things together. And then it was like the world is going to crumble. And we're like, I think I should probably cancel my flight. And of course, I mean, everything canceled at that point. And we thought, oh, well, it'll be a few months. And here we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had to cancel, our things as well, our conferences. And it was like, should you not? And then some conferences are canceling, some aren't. And a lot of venues were coming back and saying, well, this other venue, thing that was 10 times larger than yours is still going on. So why are you canceling? And so eventually everybody did cancel. It was just this really weird time at the beginning of last year. But I'm glad we see the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah, the big one, like in the Bay Area where I live, was like Oracle Open World. Or Dreamforce. Those two conferences just shut down San Francisco and didn't happen.
Yeah, I've gone to Open World once a long time ago, and I had to the only hotel that I could get was in San Mateo. So that's quite a
year out.
yeah. So it was, they actually had buses, and it took an hour to get in, or an hour and 15 minutes every day to get in from there. So it was like, that's crazy. Crazy sauce.
That's about how far away I live from downtown. It's about an hour. So I just said, I'll commute it in.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There you go. So you've been at DataStax for approaching 9 years now.
Yeah, it's thanks. Makes me feel old. But yeah, I've been here for a while. And it's okay. It's okay.
It's okay. That's all you could say about it. Come on, you've had an exciting time there.
The people ask me man, you've been at one company for a long time, and if you look at my LinkedIn, that wasn't the thing before. So what happened? And it was just because in 2011, I think, when I first started working with Apache Cassandra, and we could talk about backgrounds, but it was kind of at that point where I'm like, you know what? This is a good thing for me to spend a good portion of my life making a thing. Because I feel like this is a very important database for the future, and this is one I want my kids to use. So thankfully, I found a company that aligns with my values, and I'm still here.
Oh, well, that's good, right? So it's always good to find kind of that home. Now, what attracted you to open source in the first place? I mean, I know you were an architect before. You did some sysadmin architecture work as a director of management space. So what kind of attracted you more to this open source movement, if you will, and got you kind of galvanized into, I want to make that a career?
Well, it's funny because I started most of my IT career at a university at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I also went to school there, but this is in 95, 96. And I was working for our computing services, and we were doing a lot of Linux. I was doing kernel updates on Linux all the time because it was one of the things where and here's a classic open source story is Cal Poly as a university would get donations from companies like 3Com. They'd be like, hey, here's a box of network cards. And we used a lot of Linux in our subsystems. And these brand new cards didn't work. I mean, there was no kernel driver for them. So my boss would throw it on my desk and say, figure out how to make it work with all our Linux boxes. And so I would sit there and hack out the kernel, do the things that needed to happen to get but there's no way I could get that done without open source. It was like, yeah, if I called Sun or somebody like that, they would be like, no.
Yeah, no, yeah. Or why don't you install Solaris or buy, real hardware?
Yeah, right? Exactly. It's like, I'm sorry, that's not on the approved list. What's approved? I mean, this is a brand new, like they were giving us 100 megabit cards and no one ever saw before. So what am I going to do?
That's right.
Open source. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got started similarly, like about the same time. So you were saying mid-90s, right? So mid-90s is when I went to school, and I took a job at an internet service provider. And so back then it was Perl, CGI, all that fun stuff. And I worked at an internet service provider. So we had all Linux machines, everything was kind of custom built. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of knowledge or information on how to make some of this work. So you kind of were inventing it as you went.
Yeah, it was lists and Usenet and luck and roll up your sleeves. That was for being an engineer, it was a really cool time because we knew we were doing. It felt like you're a pirate most of the time. You're like, arr, because at the time open source was like a naughty word. Like we had to like purposely shield our provost from the fact we were using open source software. We had vendors and they would be angry if IBM was a big factor at the university or for Cal State University. And if they found out we were not using AIX for everything, they would have been very grumpy.
Oh yeah, I can imagine, right? I mean, that would be like the death knell, right? Like if that, they're like, oh my God, what are you going to do? Right.
Exactly. So we're just like, what's that machine over there? Oh, is this just a file server when it's actually running the entire university's website?
Yeah. I mean, I totally get that. Right. And I think that I've seen that from other corporate entities where you see some corporate entities that come out and, it's that, like, oh, well, don't tell anybody we're running this. It's under someone's desk. and that used to be the mentality, especially in the late 90s. It wasn't until really Oracle started to adopt, their Oracle Unbreakable Linux. Then all of a sudden, a lot of companies were like, oh. And I remember having conversations with legal teams about like the legality of the GPL.
Yeah.
So I worked for a GE-owned company, trucking company, Penske Logistics, and Penske Truck Leasing. And, back then I was an Oracle DBA, and it was always this kind of back and forth. Well, we don't know if we can use that. It's going to break so much in the infrastructure, and it's going to cause so many issues. What if we get sued? And then there was the SCO Linux thing where it was like,
oh yeah, we're all going to get sued.
Yes. And so there was that huge arc. Now what's interesting now is, you have like this, is it open? Is it not open? You have that thing that happened back in the 2000s, and now it's kind of coming back with the whole SSPL. Like now you're starting to see these database vendors and companies. All of a sudden, we're going to go more closed source, and I'm hearing from companies again going like, "Can I use that? Is that a?"
I did for a few years. I did some talks at OSCON. Pour one out. OSCON, poor OSCON. And I just did talks about the business of open source because I felt like it was always a relevant topic and always it was evergreen because every time I did a talk on it, the room was always full of people going, well, DataStax does that. Tell us something. And, it's that the whole duality. And this is, times when I'm talking to, folks about GPL versus Apache license and the GPL3, that was a big controversy because, wow, it's even more restrictive. We're going to fix the loopholes that were in GPL2. And then there was this whole bunch of other like extra, like AGPL, AGPL, probably the most misunderstood and definitely most derided of all of them because, I remember one of the discussions was, it's pronounced AGPL, the middle finger's silent. I love that one. But yeah, now we have this whole bunch of like alternative licenses that are popping up, and I always go back to the same thing I always said is if you want restrictive licensing, open source licensing, GPL is still your friend. If you want true open, Apache license v2 is still pretty good. I mean, it indemnifies people, it does patent protection, and it guarantees that it is really open. You know, it's like, no, you can do whatever you want with this. You could fork it, you can rename it, do whatever you want. And that to me seems like open. That's the open part of it. When we get into these,
yeah, totally.
It's open source unless your name is Amazon. Okay.
Yes. I mean, you can have, like, it is kind of weird to have licenses that are basically geared towards one company. But it's, I mean, I think it's, my opinion, for what it's worth, is it's investor driven money play that, you know, how do we get more shareholder value? And you hear like the arguments from a lot of these companies that are changing things, and the argument tends to be, we just want to be fairly compensated, right? That, I mean, and that's where it's like, you know, and that's the argument about like, you know, we're going to change this because, you know, the cloud is going to steal our money. But the companies are making money. It's not like they're not. And on top of that, I don't hear any of the executives complaining about pay. So that's just me. I think this is heavily investor driven. But
I agree.
We've seen.
Yeah. I think that when we first saw like the Common Core license, and there was a few others, those are 100% VC driven. And yeah. I know that because when Heather Meeker was working on her version of open source license, that was being funded by VC. And, you know, that was when we heard the term open source strip mining. You know, like, we put all this money into this company and now this other company is extracting value. All right, well, did you look at the pitch deck when they showed up and said, we're going to put this as an Apache license? And did you even know what that meant? I feel like that they just missed it.
Well, and I think that's where you start to see, you know, as these companies overlap, you actually, if you track the dots, you actually see that they all kind of funnel back up to the same VCs, the same investors, just kind of repeating. It's like an Adam Sandler movie.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, where you bring in all of the same actors for every movie. It's a similar thing. I went and I actually looked at the executive teams and the management teams from all these companies, and there's almost zero open source experience, you know, in the whole lot. You know, I think, you know, you've got Oracle, you've got Cisco, you've got, you know, New Relic, you've got, you know, all these companies that are quote unquote big companies, but they're all proprietary, you know, hardware, software type execs. And those are mostly driven by, you know, hey, we're an investment firm, we're coming in, we're going to, you know, we're going to tell you, hey, you should hire these people because they know what they're doing. But, you know, we can't dismiss that the cloud has been disruptive, right? You know, the fact of the matter now is, you know, that the whole industry's changed because of the cloud. And licensing aside, now, you know, we're in this age of enabling developers where it's all about how can, you know, developers self-serve? How can they kind of push the envelope a bit more? And that's led to really the folks who have worked in the database space for a long time, like myself or others, to wonder where do they go? And I know you've got some thoughts on that kind of journey from the DBA space. Tell us a little bit about where you're seeing things evolve.
Yeah, well, and first of all, you know, I'm a DBA too. I got my tickets from Oracle. I'm an Oracle DBA recovering, but you know, that was. Does
it take you that long to recover? Because it's been years.
Yeah, right? Exactly. No, I still wake up and go redo log. Okay, I'm good. I was doing a delete in my dream and it was terrible. But yeah, I mean, it's DBAs. Kind of, let's face it. These are my people. This is we made the world what it is today, and there's no denying it. But as everything happens, it's an evolution. And so, you know, you and I have talked about this, and I've been talking to a lot of folks about it. Is this whole transition where I want to help a large group of people get to one place, and that's that DBA to SRE transition. SREs are really being an SRE now, especially in a cloud native world, is the future. That's where things are going. And what I hate to see is DBAs feeling like they're not invited, or that they just have no place. Like, oh, I'm turned. All of a sudden, I woke up and I'm the mainframe person. No, not at all.
I think there's some fear there, though, right?
I think so too, and I think it's well founded, because you could get relegated really quickly to something that you just, it's not a very good career move. But it's like, I think this is worth the discussion. It's like, what are the transportable skills, and how can we make that transition?
And what I've seen is, the thing that DBAs generally excel at is always that kind of problem solving and troubleshooting. Because let's be honest, as a DBA, I can't remember the number of times that I got the phone call, it's slow. And, there's no more information than it's slow.
Right.
Right? That's it. And so you get the call, it's slow, and then you have to defend that, hey, your database isn't the bottleneck, it's the application somewhere else. And you have to go up and down the stack to basically defend, what you've got. And that kind of background and mentality of being in, that middle ground where you're between the hardware and the system, and you're between the application, you live in that middle world. You have to have a foot in both worlds, which makes us a little more adaptable to those roles of an SRE or DBRE or whatever you want to call it, where now we have those skills to go out and to do that troubleshooting. And I just wrote a blog just a couple days ago on the skills that you need for that SRE. And I'm curious, what skills do you think really shine when you talk about that role?
Well, yeah. So if Matt, I'm sure you've done this a million times. When you're a DBA, it's your responsibility. And I know how many times we sat there at the operating system, getting kernel parameters set up properly, getting the storage correct, even like attached storage or local storage, installing the software, paying attention to all the details and thinking of it as a system, but in a local setting. Where SREs now, and if you're using Kubernetes, and you will, because Kubernetes is the way we do things now, what you're doing is you're setting up virtual data centers. But the way that those things are set up, and this is, I think, the interesting part of Kubernetes, is it's taking those similar concepts of like system builds and putting it into a configuration file. So if a DBA is sitting there like, hey, when I install my database, I need to make sure all these things, here's my list of things that need to be correct. Similar type of thinking. Storage. Is my compute correct? Is my networking configured correctly? So just the basic knowledge of how these things are interconnected, and then what they really mean for performance. I can't tell you how many SREs I've run into that, well, I'm just going to assume everything is awesome and deploy this thing, and then, they're just not thinking about, well, I'm building something for performance. They're just getting it out there. And I'd say that a DBA skill is, I will use the good stuff.
And this is where I think that what we've done is we've made it so easy for people to get started with a lot of the databases that they do skip over a lot of those core skills and the core things that they need to do. Honestly, this is why we see so many database breaches. They're not breaches. They're leaving the front door open, and with a big sign up front that says, come on in, my data's free, because they're not setting passwords, right? They just click a button. It starts up with no password, and, great, look at me. Let me copy over a terabyte of, personal data from people. But you also see that, now, if we need more capacity, we'll just, go to the next instance, swipe the credit card, And that's a dangerous, process, because eventually you run out of capacity and you waste a ton of extra space, time, effort, money. It's a dangerous, slippery slope.
Well, DBA's been a really important gatekeeper in a lot of ways, because data infrastructure is typically the most expensive, right? That's where you get your high performance storage. That's where you get the most expensive servers, and for good reason. I mean, that if your database is slow, then everything is slow. And it has been and still will be the center of the universe for running applications, whether it was back in my LAMP stack back in the day, or your CGI Perl one, which I guess that was LAMP. But to, cloud native, modern data apps are still a thing. And thinking about all of the aspects, like being able to test performance, being able to know how the security should be set up. And with like Kubernetes, completely different game with security, but it isn't. It's virtual firewalls. It's port access is very restrictive. But I don't know any DBAs who don't know how to deal with that. That's just a core competency.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you just got to learn the configuration file.
Yeah. No, and I think that's where it's super interesting as you start to look at this new paradigm that exists, where developers kind of rule the roost. They get to choose the technologies. They get to choose a lot that enabling them and securing them and preventing them from doing the things that are going to kill you or cause issues. It's critical to build those guide rails and build in flexibility. But it's interesting because you get this mixed message. And so I have no personal beef with cloud providers or other database providers if they're proprietary, not proprietary. I just don't like when people get kind of like misled. That's my thing, right? That's kind of where I draw the line is, hey, if you want to sell a license, right? Go for it. I think open source will beat you, but that's okay. Same thing in the cloud. Hey, if you want to run database as a service and you want to go and just, put everything in Amazon or Microsoft or Google, go for it, right? Just as long as you know what you're getting into. And I think that, what I've seen is a lot of marketing material messaging around these is it's set it and forget it, right? You're like, you don't need a DBA anymore. You don't need that skill set. You just click the button. I actually saw on Twitter this week, somebody posted a quote from a trainer from one of the big cloud providers. And the quote was something along the lines of, you don't need a database anymore because storage is so cheap, right? And it's like, what?
Yeah, I know, and I get that sentiment. And to be fair, like I just did a talk at this week at Developer Week, and you're gonna love the title, you're gonna hate it. Which I was saying, stop using databases and start using data services. And I also just wrote an article for the New Stack, which will be coming out very shortly, about how the revolution in serverless databases will happen in open source. So I'm going to glue these things together for just
That's
for you,
okay. No, and here's the thing. I don't mind it, like, honestly, like the server architecture, the data services, there's still a database behind these.
Yeah, there is. And I think the up level of thinking for DBAs as they're going into SREs is thinking about like still critical. These are still critical parts of your infrastructure, but it's providing a service for the developers. Like you said, developers are making choices. And this is where if you're deploying something on Kubernetes, say for instance, deploying your data services on Kubernetes and providing that for your development team is just as critical. And yeah, there's a database behind it, but this is part of your setup. When you're going through you're creating a deployment in Kubernetes, what you're doing is you're assembling the right parts so that whenever developers are having that API discussion or whatever they're having, they're not making very many trade-offs, and you're giving them the service that they need to be successful. And that's a really critical part of any enterprise.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I would be remiss because to not ask, because you do work for DataStax, and I think about 40% of our people who kind of follow Percona are also using Cassandra. What's new and exciting in the world of Cassandra? What are you guys working on, and what's kind of like the new sweetness out there?
Yeah, what is new? Well, all right, for one, Cassandra 4.0 finally is shipping, and yay, go team! And I think it'll be one of the most stable databases today that you can download, and it's just because of how much time has gone into database stability. I know you had Heinrich on, and you can't get anybody more knowledgeable about database internals and stability. And the guy is really in rarefied air. But what I think is the most interesting and the most exciting right now is what I was just talking about, like this move to serverless in databases, where the typical, and this is what I just wrote about for the new stack. And so, like I said, I'm giving you the preview because I don't know when it's going to be published. It's, the typical stack when you deploy a database or any server really, but a database especially, there's a tight integration between CPU, storage, network, everything's, in that box. And we started trying to build things around commodity in that. Well, in cloud native and what we're building for even in enterprises and in clouds or wherever you are, that commodity definition has changed. And it's now compute, storage, network, and each one is metered. You pay for each one of them as you need it. So instead of building capacity around, with Cassandra, when you use Cassandra, you think of how big is my cluster going to be? How many nodes? And then that's your cost because it's running 24/7. And sure, you can bring it down if you need to, but not a lot of people do that. So what we're working on at DataStax right now is this idea of really truly separating compute and storage so that you pay for exactly what you need. And then whenever you're, like, for instance, if you do need to do 1 million writes per second for 5 minutes, then you pay for that. And then you stop, you just pay for the storage at that point. And, I think this is along the line of what's happening with clouds. That's what they want you to do. But the thing that's really important for us is that happens in open source. You want to run it in your own data center? You want to run it on your laptop? Go for it.
I mean, it's that, you have power then, right? It's about maintaining control of your data and your infrastructure. And, you can choose one cloud provider over another. And I think that's one of the great things about Kubernetes is it is kind of an equalizer.
Yeah, it is. And going back to the DBA, the SRE thing is, this is, how we configure that and how we build them still needs intimate knowledge of how data works. It's not just an app. It's that knowledge of stateful applications, which is not a lot of folks in the Kubernetes world know how to run stateful applications.
It is the Wild West right now.
Oh, it's great. I love that. It's like hacking out kernel drivers from my 3Com card. It's great.
Yes. And we know that there's a lot of work going on to that because we're talking with several folks in the Data on Kubernetes community, and we're working on what we can do to kind of bring forces to bear from multiple companies to try and help build that stateful infrastructure.
We've been in a few meetings, and I think this is exciting for me because I feel like, okay, we're making this legit. And what that means is, I always love that new community smell. Like, oh, it's so good, because everyone's excited and wow, we're starting something really interesting here. And I don't know about you, but no one I talk to says, wow, that's a dumb idea. But we're looking at what we're going to do. I think we're going to have some really cool event stuff going on around KubeCon Europe in May. You and I'll be there in force, I'm sure. So yeah,
I mean, it should be exciting. And, I think that it is a cool space we're in. It's ripe for innovation. Really excited for us to kind of work together on what we can bring to it, see what problems we can solve, hopefully make the world a bit more open as we like to all focus on. It's always a good thing, right?
Oh, yeah. I love that part. Yeah. And, beating the cloud at their own game seems really good.
Well, we got to disrupt, right? That's the nature of open source is disruption, and so let's disrupt the disruptors. That's always the mantra. So, Patrick, It was great having you on. I'll give you the final word. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about? Anything you want to pitch? Anything that you want people to know about that's coming up?
What's going on? Well, I gave you the serverless one. That was a big one. But yeah, we would love, if you want to be a part of what we're doing with Kubernetes and Cassandra, if you're a DBA, we have the Cassandra project, which is really, I spend a lot of time working on Cassandra right now. And Cassandra is a cutely named project, but really what we're doing is we're gathering SRE knowledge around running Cassandra and Kubernetes. And it's got a lot of components that are really good. And if you want to join that community, it's all open source. We do SIG meetings through the Apache Software Foundation every couple of weeks. So if you want to hit me up on the ASF Slack, I'm always there. It integrates Stargate, which you and I have talked about a bit too, which is a data gateway for backend databases. And So we're you know, we've got some cool stuff happening in the open source field there. So if you're interested in joining one of those communities, Stargate or Cassandra, we'd love to have you.
Well, great, Patrick. Wonderful talking with you. I hope you have a great rest of the week and appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll see you at Percona Live, and we'll have you on in a future episode to talk about some other cool things.
That'd be great.
All right,
thanks, Matt.
Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.